I don't think that there's anything wrong with the word ambition. But when I think about applying it to myself, that is where I am physically getting uncomfortable. If I were to think about how I would want others to describe me, describing me as ambitious, that wouldn't be my number one goal.
When you initially asked me about ambition, Jessi, I said I feel like it's a young person's sport. It's somebody's thing that you strive for when you're fresh out of college. You know, if someone were to say to me now, "You're so ambitious," I'd be like, hello, of course, I know that. I know. I've achieved some things.
Ambition has a sort of gendered and stereotypical quality. I think about ambitious, like women in movies, and they're like, dog eat dog, elbow other people out, succeed at the expense of others, sort of ball busters. I hate that word, but that's sort of what we're talking about, right? From the news team at LinkedIn, I'm Jessi Hempel, and this is Hello Monday. It's our show about work on our own terms. Ambition. What do you think of the word? Literally, I want you to stop wherever you are. If you're watching this, if you're listening, hold that word front of mind and answer me. Do you love this word or do you despise it? Do you want to be more ambitious or do you worry that you will be seen as ambitious? I really love this word. I have always felt ambitious. As a young child, I knew about myself that I was an ambitious person. And so I mistakenly thought that everybody would feel about this word like I do. And I can tell you this, I am wrong about that. We have a new tagline, right? Hello Monday is a show about work on our own terms. And I quite like where we've landed with it, but it didn't start there. It started in a room last fall where I gathered about a dozen of my colleagues. I chose the folks that I feel most creatively in tune with, people who I respect and admire, and frankly, people who are really crushing it around here. I wanted to come up with this new tagline, and I put a whole bunch of ideas on the table. All of them, to a T, had the word ambition in them. And finally, one woman said, "Ugh, I hate that word. It does not represent me." And I thought, well, what's going on here? I mean, these are some of the most ambitious women I know at this company. What's with this word? So today we're devoting the entire episode to ambition. And because I've already told you that I love this word, I wanted to invite a couple of my colleagues in here who feel very differently about it. Now, I have chosen two partners for this conversation who are literally and figuratively crushing it here. You're going to hear from Ahyiana Angel. She works with our advertisers here. Whenever you hear an advertiser in conversation with me or another host in the studio, Ahyiana has probably produced it. She hosts her own podcast. It's called the Switch, Pivot, or Quit podcast. She is phenomenal at it. And you'll also hear from Hayley Saltzman. Whenever you see those short videos out in the world that feature guests from our show, Hayley is probably leading that strategy. Now, I want you to think of a third chair here at this table, and that third chair is occupied by you. As we talk, I want you to hold right in your mind your own opinions and thoughts about this, because we're going to come back to them. With that, on with the show. I want to start by asking you each a more personal question. I want you to introduce yourselves. Ahyiana, I want to start with you. I want to know if you're comfortable sharing a little bit about what you consider to be your career, what stage of professional you are, and if you don't mind sharing your age.
Okay, so my name is Ahyiana Angel, as you mentioned, and what stage am I in? I feel like I am mid-career. Mid-career in the sense that I've done some things, and and I know some things, I've learned some things, and people do come to me for advice, for insight, for observations on how I've navigated things and how I can maybe guide them. And so I feel like I'm mid-career. I feel like I'm an adventurous person outside of my career. I like to switch things up. I like to change my environments. I like to push myself. And it's not always related to ambition, right? Mm-hmm. It's like I was on a boat and we were in Hawaii and it was like the deep sea and we were supposed to go swim with dolphins. And the guy was like, "If you're not a strong swimmer, stay on the boat." And I was like, oh gosh, I'm not that strong of a swimmer. But at the last minute, I hopped off and I got out there. I was like, go, you got this. You just got to go. So I like to push myself in different environments. And so I feel like that is a part of my makeup, being a person that constantly pushes themselves despite the fear that I may feel in my whole entire body.
Gosh, I wish I had that trait. I would be on that boat. Okay, so you live in New York City, and you can say, Jessi, stop asking, how old are you?
Ooh, see, the only reason I don't want to answer this question is because I feel like people put you in a box
Yeah.
when you say your age. And I don't want to be put in a box. That's one thing I'm always firm about is never try to put me in a box. Because if you count me out or you try and put me over here in a certain category, you're always going to be wrong.
I love that answer.
Yeah.
That is an answer to the question. What are you talking about?
But it is also not impossible to figure out how old I am if you are a slight detective.
Right. Well, there you go. Hayley, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Where might you say you are in your career, and how would you describe it?
Great question that I've had now time to think about. And I would say that I feel like I am mid-career, but I know that I am early mid-career. And as you were asking Ahyiana about this, I realized that probably now 8 years ago, I received an award called the Up and Comers Award. And I remember feeling like exhausted by that because I was like, I'm considered an up and comer, like a career starter at this phase of my career. I feel like I've been working forever. I'm exhausted. I was an up and comer 8 years ago. That's what I will say. So I think now I feel mid-career, but early mid-career is I think where I am.
Well, so share with us a little bit, if you will, about what we might want to understand about you outside of your career.
I wasn't planning to explain it this way, but in the context of what Ahyiana said, I would say I am the opposite in many ways of Ahyiana in my life. I would consider myself a rule follower, someone who does not often take a lot of risks, and the person who would be on the boat. I really like to approach life with the awareness that nothing is guaranteed, nothing is given, and doing my best to set myself up for the things that I want and for, happiness and health and all of the things that I desire in life. But this really strong awareness that I cannot control it all. Unexpected things happen, and you just have to roll with those unexpected moments. And that's why I like rules and order wherever possible in the chaos.
That is such a different orientation. It's great. It's why I have you both at the table. And see, Hayley, this is me not asking you how old you are because I would hate to put you in a box. I learn as we go.
I was just going to say, I just turned 35 last week, and I feel like it's a time where you think a lot about age, turning 35. And so I'm happy to say that. I don't know what box that puts me in, but 35.
I love that. So, Hayley, I'm going to start with you and put you on the spot because you were the first person in that brainstorm last fall around taglines who literally had an allergic reaction to the word ambition. Do you remember that?
I do. My emotions are written on my face. My physical reaction to things is always pretty apparent. And I do remember I almost surprised even myself with how visceral my reaction was. I probably interrupted the brainstorm and just made a noise like, ugh, and just physically like recoiled at the thought of having to describe myself as ambitious. So yes, I do remember that very clearly.
So what's wrong with the word ambition? I mean, what does it mean to you in the first place? What does it represent?
The word ambition in and of itself is a great word. When I heard you describing yourself as an ambitious child, that I find that to be commendable, endearing, amazing. That's what I hope for my child, right? To be ambitious. So I don't think that there's anything wrong with the word ambition. But when I think about applying it to myself, that is where I am physically getting uncomfortable again. And I think it's really about having this word thrust upon you and not really feeling ownership of that word. I myself like to control what I can, like to identify myself in the ways that I see myself. And ambition just feels like a way that someone else might describe me. And it's not something I would own as my own identity.
You feel like that is a word someone else is putting on you. But more than that, it sounds to me like it's not a word you want them to put on you.
If I were to think about how I would want others to describe me, that would not be at the top of my list. I would prefer that someone would say that I'm kind, that I make space for others, that I am that I'm driven if we're going to get close to ambition, but describing me as ambitious, that wouldn't be my number one goal.
I understand what you're saying because when you initially asked me about ambition, Jessi, I said I feel like it's a young person's sport. It's somebody's thing that you strive for when you're fresh out of college. If someone were to say to me now, "You're so ambitious," I'd be like, "Hello, of course, I know that. I know. I've achieved some things, as I said. So you can't achieve certain things without having an internal ambition. But I don't need you to describe me as ambitious, because that almost feels like, I don't know, it almost feels like something that you would just say to someone that is younger. And I feel like it removes a little bit of respect from it to me, because as a person who has shown up in the workforce and who has delivered time and time again, for you to say that I'm ambitious, it feels like you're not reading the full book that I offer and that I bring to the table.
I love that. And I'm hearing two different things from what you guys are saying. You are pairing this idea of ambition with drive, but it's like drive has some positive connotations to it, but ambition is the overlay we put on it that has a sort of gendered and stereotypical quality. I think about ambitious, like women in movies, and they're like dog eat dog, elbow other people out, succeed at the expense of others, sort of ball busters. I hate that word, but that's sort of what we're talking about, right? And you, it feels to me, are more poking at this idea that ambition also embodies a certain want or a desire. And that once you kind of realize that want, or realize that you are capable of like moving toward that want, well, ambition's in the rearview mirror. You're beyond that. You have enough confidence at this point that ambition doesn't feel relevant.
Absolutely. I think it's something that we are conditioned and trained to sort of feel like we should do if we want to be at the top of the top. It's interwoven with a competitive nature that's sort of ingrained in us from when we're younger. And I think that sometimes women show up from a space of, I want to prove to you that I'm just as good as, if not better than. And I think that for me, what I've realized is as you start to prove that externally, you then gain that confidence to realize that internally, that's not what I need. That's not what's pushing me. That's not what's driving me. And you also start to block out the societal norms that align with ambition and why you should be this ambitious person.
I think you're both getting at the way that your notions of what it is to be ambitious are all extrinsic. They're all coming from external sources saying to you, and this is true, right? From when we're very young, right? We start to operate according to what we believe the world wants from us. And that is even more intense for young women, and even more intense, I think, for anybody who identifies as an only or another in a room, right? And there is a flip that happens at some point in our adulthood if we are lucky and lucky enough to be in supportive environments where we are rewarded for our talents, where we stop worrying so much about what the system wants from us, and we start to be able to identify what we want for ourselves.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I know that point where that happened for me. When I left sports entertainment PR at a major league, this was a job that was coveted by other people, a place where people wanted to be. And people were saying to me, like, why would you ever leave this career? What is wrong with you? Like, have you lost the plot? And I'm like, no, this is actually my personal plot twist. And this is by my choosing that I'm doing this, because I'm no longer concerned about what you think, or you think. I checked all of the boxes, and I found myself still sitting there being like, I am not happy. I don't like this. I don't know where I'm supposed to go next. And that is a part of the reason why I created the Switch, Pivot, or Quit podcast, because as my journey continued, I realized that there were so many other people who were in the same position, but they didn't want to speak up and they didn't want to say it. Now we have more people having and hosting conversations like you about, hey, it's okay to change your mind and it's okay to do different things. But I remember at that point in time feeling very like isolated and feeling like people were looking at me like, how are you going to do this? Are you making the best choice and the best decision? But I had to be strong and I had to be steeped in my decision in a way that I couldn't let others shake me, and realize that I was still going to do great things even if I didn't have this big company name behind me.
I was going to ask if that was really the moment that you owned things internally and realized that it wasn't this extrinsic, external validation, but internal success that you were after. Because I relate.
Absolutely.
That's why.
Yeah, absolutely. I had no choice but to own it. I had already grappled with all of these feelings, and I was doing self-development, personal development, self-awareness work before I even really knew what it was, because I just knew that I needed a change in my life. And so by the time I got to the point where I put in my notice and I was like, I'm quitting, I had already become really, really comfortable with what I was going to do next. Now, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a fully fleshed out plan. I wasn't like you. I should have had you in my back pocket on speed dial, like, Hayley, what should I do? I didn't have a plan, but I believed in myself enough, and I just knew that I couldn't keep going in the direction that I had been going in because it wasn't serving me anymore.
I feel like that moment that you just articulated is a moment that has happened in the career of most of my peers, most of my female peers, definitely. It certainly has happened for me. When you get to the top of the game you are playing and you are receiving so much reward, so many accolades for having gotten to that point, and you simultaneously realize you're completely dead inside. I'm curious, you are earlier in your career. Have you had anything that feels like that yet?
Why, yes, I have, Jessi. I'm like holding myself back here because I have been, I think, very vocal about the fact that I actually quit my job without any other job lined up after 6.5 years working at a startup. And it was the same sort of moment for me where I realized what had been my dream job, what had been such a fulfilling job early on, what I had learned so much from, I had been so proud to build, was not for me anymore for a bunch of different reasons. It came down to understanding myself and understanding what I needed and what happiness and success looked like for me versus what others might think that success would look like. I said I'm not a risk taker, but I quit without any plan. So Ahyiana, I would have just told you to quit as you did. And I did not work for 9 months after that, being really intentional about my next move and what I was thinking of doing. And I was very lucky to be in that position to take that time for myself. But that was still, to this day, the best decision I've made for my career. And it still grounds me in how I think about the work that I do and my career.
In those moments when you each then took steps in new directions, from my perspective, that is the moment where you actually became more ambitious. You owned your ambition. You said, I'm not going that way. I see this other thing for myself ahead, and I'm going to move toward what I really want. How does it feel when I say that?
I had an immediate thought, which is that my definition of ambition is very focused on what others are saying about you and that external definition of ambition. And when you quit a job, people don't know what to do with that. If you just say, oh, I'm not working, and by choice, right? I chose this. They don't know what to do with that. And people look at that, I would say, as the opposite of an ambitious person. So for me, it felt like others did not see me as ambitious in that moment, but I quite honestly did not care what others thought.
I think in a roundabout way, ambition was somewhere in the back of my mind because I was saying to myself, like, you have more in you than this. At that point, I had already co-created a jewelry line, and Beyonce had worn our jewelry, and it was in Italian Vogue, and that was like a side thing that I was working on while working there, and it energized me so much, and I was like, just having those moments where you're thinking like, there's more out there for me. I just have to figure out what it is. So I do think that ambition played a role somewhere there. I was able to find my voice within quitting. And that's not going to be true for everyone. And I want to honor that also. And it's not always an easy road either. But I do think that there is some freedom that comes along with it. And that was something that I needed at the time. And I think that freedom also went hand in hand with my ambition.
Yeah, well put. You know, Hayley, I remember early on when you got here, at some point we went to lunch and you were just killing it here. And I was like, what do you want to do next? And you looked at me like, how dare you ask me? It was a kind how dare you, but you felt a little like, I just want to do this job. It was almost as if you were saying, I don't want you to want anything from me. And I was wondering, now that you've been here for longer and you have been on this new career journey, this chapter of your career journey, like, how do you feel about upward mobility and progress within the organization?
I am not someone who would ever say, I need to have this C-suite title by the time I'm a certain age, or I need this certain career milestone. which is why I may have reacted the way that I did. But I am very growth oriented. And what I love about working here and what I love about the work we all get to do every day is that it is constantly changing and there are always new challenges. And so being able to continue to learn every day and to be confronted with challenges that I don't know the answer to, I don't know how to navigate it, that is exciting to me. And that's what keeps me interested in working here and wanting to grow. And that's what motivates me more than any sort of like my 5-year career plan to, climb the ladder. Like that's not what motivates me.
I so appreciate that you brought the word grow into the conversation, because as soon as you said it, it felt like energy in my body settled. When I was in 3rd grade and I was describing myself as ambitious, what that really meant is I was a person who trusted that I could grow. And that is actually the thing that I want. If you ask me personally, well, what do I want in the future? I don't know. I mean, who would have thought a podcast would have existed 25 years ago? I never would have said I wanted to host it. But I know that I just want to feel in every moment like I'm growing and like I can trust that. I'm curious if it feels like maybe that is a more modern definition of ambition for women. Yeah. So big question. How do you think about the relationship between fear and ambition?
I haven't really thought about fear and ambition, like in the same sentence. I do stuff, as I said before, even when I'm fearful. It doesn't mean that I'm fearless. It just means that I'm okay with pushing myself, especially when I think I'm going to grow. And I think that is something worth endeavoring into because it'll help inform something in my future.
For me, as an anxious person, fear is like the undercurrent of how I think about most things. So I would say in relation to ambition, part of my reaction may have also come from the fact that ambition implies wanting something very specific, right? At least in my mind. And then along with that comes the fear of what happens if you don't achieve that, if you don't get what you're after. Whereas describing myself as driven is maybe has a bit of an implication that I'm driving towards something. I do want something. I'm acknowledging that. However, I'm working toward it and it may not happen exactly as I am thinking about it. So I think part of my distaste for the word ambition could come from that anxiety.
I think so much of ambition is finding a way to say what you want. I think for me, the reason why I love the word ambition, there is the piece that really does have to do with growing and growth, and I'm going to recast ambition in that way. But it's this idea that ambition is simply saying out loud, hey, I want this. And before anybody else judges me for that, that means that I've gotten to the point where I know what I want. And I think it's a radical thing for a woman in the world to know what they want.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What advice do you have for someone who is currently struggling with their relationship to ambition?
Speak about the work that you do, and especially if you're doing great work, you are the only person who's really going to be able to speak to it in an authentic way. So speak up.
I love that. I love that. If you could just tell me that on the regular.
I tell myself. You have to. Like, I feel gross about it still, but you have to do it. Yeah.
There's a few things swirling in my mind. One is get clear on what you think you want, like what feels most natural to you. And maybe you start off with evaluating, like, what are my values? What do I really place a high value on? And how does that currently align with how I'm showing up in a career environment? And how would I like it to better align, right? And then also, like you were saying, pour into yourself. Feed yourself with goodness. One of the things that I did recently, which I loved, I used Claude to create a hype advertisement for myself. I gave Claude my bio and I said, write an ad for me based off of this bio and really talk me up. Let me know how dope I am. Let me know that no one can touch me, and just create it, Claude. Okay. And so Claude created it. And you know what I did? I read it as a voice note to myself on my phone. And so I can play that whenever I need to hear it. So whenever you start to second guess and doubt yourself, go back to that voice note. Create that voice note, go back to that voice note, and make it something a part of your regular routine to hype yourself up if you're feeling fearful, if you're feeling like your ambition is waning, if you're feeling like you don't know exactly where you need to go next. Talk your ish. Talk your ish, play that for yourself so that you can realize, oh, whatever I really want and whatever I set my mind to, I can really do it. Let AI hype you up. Let AI be your personal hype woman, because AI, believe it or not, will come up with some things and some wording and some language that you wouldn't have even put together for yourself. Sometimes it's really hard to lean into your own greatness and really, really own it, but AI will do it in a snap. And then you can just take that and run with it.
You just heard from two of my favorite colleagues here at LinkedIn. And yes, I say that about a lot of people. I like my colleagues. Hayley Saltzman and Ahyiana Angel. Ahyiana's podcast is Switch, Pivot, or Quit. Go find it. It's great. There's just so much that I'm thinking of now that we've had this conversation. First, this tension that exists between the extrinsic read of ambition, what people outside of you think about you when they think about you as ambitious, and the intrinsic read on ambition. What does it mean to want things? What do you want, right? Second, ambition. What does it mean to you? For me, I feel more clear, more centered. Ambition means that I understand what growth looks like, what I want it to look like, and that I'm going for growth. It doesn't take the form of a big house or a big book or anything that I can name. It's a feeling inside when I'm living up to whatever it is that I think of personally as my potential, when I'm in flow. Finally, the best takeaway from this entire conversation, I don't know, maybe the whole season of Hello Monday to date, ask AI to be your hype woman. No, really here. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, take a second and stop. Open a screen, pull up ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude or whatever you use, and ask it to write a paragraph about you. Write a paragraph that sells you, that hypes you up. And then I want you to read that paragraph. Today, tomorrow, every day. And take it in. Understand that it can be your truth. Now, if you want to share that paragraph with us, or if you just want to talk more about ambition, I hope you'll come to office hours this week. Every Wednesday afternoon, I get together with our senior producer, Sarah Storm. We go live from the LinkedIn news page. If you can't remember that, don't worry. We'll put a link in the show notes. And if this episode got you thinking, well, send it to the person you most want to talk about ambition with, whoever that is. Okay, we'll have another show for you next Monday. I'm Jessi Hempel. Thanks for joining.